All right. Welcome to the Dynasty 365 podcast, the Dynasty Fantasy Football podcast for fantasyinframes.com. You can follow the mothership at Fantasy in Frames on Twitter. You can follow our show at our new Twitter at Dynasty 365 pod. If you're listening in audio form, please subscribe, rate, and review. That'll help us out a lot. I'm Brian Ford, and I'm joined by my co-host Tyler Heil. Tyler, how you doing?
Oh man, I'm good. I'm a little out of my comfort zone. We're just still doing work to our house, and I'm figuring out a setup in my closet because that's the only space in my house where I have any room to do it. So I've got shadows everywhere. I didn't get my fan set up, so excuse me if I just start sweating like Shaq at the foul line. Podcast, it's just going to be dripping off my nose, but it'll still be fun, and I'm excited to dive into some of these rookies on defense.
Right on. And it's okay, folks. You don't have to hide in the closet. You can say, yes, I do love IDP, because that's what we are going to be talking about tonight with our very special guest, someone close to home here, the CEO of Fantasy in Frames and a member of our Shoot the Gap podcast, which is our new IDP podcast, which just launched a little while ago. Jorge Edwards. Jorge, how you doing?
Guys, it's great to be back on the show. Been loving the past few weeks, your past few months of all the Dynasty content you guys are putting out here, as well as the article work you're doing. It's very excited to come here and talk about some Dynasty IDP.
Right on. And so let's dive right into it. We just had the draft season, our NFL draft and our rookie drafts in our Dynasty leagues. And we certainly cover a lot from the offensive perspective on our usual show. And so we're dedicating this episode to the IDP side of things. So what were your overall thoughts on the 2022 IDP rookie class? Specifically, let's say, was there one or two positions that stood out as being deep or shallow? Or I know some folks said there was a lot of edge. What are your thoughts on that?
Right, you hit the nail right on the head there. Edge rushing, defensive end, outside linebackers. Basically, defensive ends and your outside linebackers in a 4-3 or a 3-4, respectively. Their job is to get to the quarterback, to get the quarterback hits, to get the sacks. And that may not be important to some people in their IDP leagues. It all comes back to your IDP scoring. So some leagues, for example, the FIF scoring we have here at Fantasy in Frames that we'll be using in our 4i Championship best ball tournament coming up, which we'll have announcements for that, as soon as we get into June. We reward sacks, we reward QB hits, we give them decent point value so that every single play, whether it's an interception or a tackle or a sack, they're all pretty comparable to one another in terms of like the likelihood that X position will do this versus that position will do that. Basically, what I'm trying to say is it balances the field, this FIF IDP scoring we have. So yeah, edge defender for us, for the people who are utilizing that scoring setting, that's big. None of us saw Trayvon Walker going number 1 overall. I shouldn't say none of us. I'm sure there's somebody out there somewhere, some way, some house thought that he was. But I think one of the things to take away also from this draft is like there are a lot of people here who are in a great position to slide into starting spots, as well as being right there on the cusp of just needing things to break their way this offseason or through the season to assert themselves and being a really good, not only real NFL defender, but a good one for IDP.
And Tyler, you had a question specifically about linebacker.
Yeah, Jorge, I've been listening to Shoot the Gap. Definitely been enjoying that. It seems like, to me, just as an outside observer, his linebacker kind of turned into the running back of IDP. Teams don't too often dedicate really high draft capital. There's one here and there in the first round, but they can be really impactful right away. Am I, on the right track there, or am I just way off?
So I think traditionally speaking, a lot of people equate linebackers with running backs just because, running backs, they get yardage easily by just going forward. And then of course your linebackers get the IDP points from tackles, again by just going forward. I think you can kind of expand that a little bit to receptions and targets a little bit. Not so much targets, but the receptions, with PPR being a more prevalent form of IDP or fantasy football scoring, and even half PPR. Getting those receptions is key. Getting those positive plays is key. So linebacker, I think, equates to the position that gets you more positive plays for getting you fantasy points. But yes, it is kind of the bread and butter of your IDP roster. We did a mock draft on Shoot the Gap last week, and we had the 4 analysts of Shoot the Gap, as well as the bots on Sleeper, and we had specific situations for each person who was drafting. So my situation was that my dynasty roster was complete garbage. I needed to do a complete rebuild at IDP, and so my very first pick was Devin Lloyd at linebacker. So I understood the importance of having to establish that base, which is where you get your linebacker, which is why a linebacker is so prevalent a pick for IDP circles.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Todd.
I just had a follow up to that. I'm just using you as a resource here, Jorge. I'm gonna keep asking questions. To kind of lean further into the running back linebacker comparison, running backs, there's a lot of guys that get some playing time. So I guess what's kind of a good mark for like a super like elite productive linebacker? Is it like 150 tackle mark, or are there just a lot of guys getting 150 tackles out there?
What Foyce Luke did for Atlanta last year, I think he had over like 150, or at least around that margin. That is a huge outlier. That doesn't happen often. But you get into 130s, 140s, 120s, you're in pretty good production range there. And there's, quite frankly, there's a lot of linebackers that can get you to that point. Even when you're in the low hundreds, serviceable linebackers, your RB2s or wide receiver 2s, if you will, or your LB2s, so to speak. Now, again, with linebacker, you have to remember that, like I mentioned, the outside linebackers and your defensive ends are your edge rushers who go to the quarterback. It's your inside linebackers that you're going to find having those high tackle floors that'll get you those 100+ tackles. That their job is primarily to either play in coverage or to specifically go after the running back.
On the offensive side of the 2022 class, the people were down on it, but also there was depth to it, and maybe that depth got flat real quick. Like there was not too many at the top, and then it flattened out. But there was a lot of depth, and I'm seeing that in rookie drafts and post draft waivers in leagues. What can you say about the depth of the 2022 IDP rookie class?
So there is a lot of depth at edge rusher, as we were just talking about, that being the prevalent position here in the NFL draft. There's linebacker. It is for starting linebacker. Let me put it like that. Let me just emphasize that. For linebackers that could actually go in there and make an impact day one, there's not as much as there are linebackers who are like waiting in the wings, waiting to get that moment to strut their stuff and to impress their coaches. Defensive back, that's where you get things that get kind of tricky. Here at Fantasy and Frames, we reward passes defensed or plays that cornerbacks, which are normally considered the bastard children of IDP, aren't given much love just because, well, it's hard to predict play of a cornerback. You can't count on the interceptions from year to year, which is why we recommend not drafting Trayvon Diggs as your number one IDP, because you can't count on the interceptions from year to year. What you can look at, though, are the targets. How many times this person is targeted? Is this person allowing a good or a poor NFL passer rating when targeted? If they're allowing a good one, that tells you, okay, quarterbacks like throwing at this guy because he lets me make completions all over the place, which is great because then that puts you in a position where you can get passes defensed and get points that way. But in terms of safeties, which are generally the traditional defensive back position, the strong safeties specifically, those positions play closer to the line of scrimmage. They kind of act like a third or fourth linebacker on the field where their job is to also help stop the run. Not as many of those positions, which is kind of disheartening. But there are a few out there that I think we'll probably talk about a little bit later.
And Tyler, you had a question about defensive backs?
Yeah, I guess Jorge kind of answered it with the cornerbacks and kind of being the bastard children of IDP. But even with that, there's 8 cornerbacks, 5 safeties drafted in the top 50 of the draft. That's a huge percentage to go in the defensive backfield. Are you extremely excited for second-round picks as a result of that, or are DBs just that devalued, or cornerbacks just that devalued?
Again, it goes back to your IDP scoring. It drives me crazy that there isn't a universal adopted scoring that makes every position on the field equally as valuable. Fortunately, ours does, which is why we promote it. Does it make me disappointed? Yes and no. You would like to see a good representation of all the different IDP spots. But again, just like on offense, just like when you're doing your flex plays for the week and you're trying to figure out who's the best flex option, who has the best matchup versus a cornerback, linebacker, so to speak, when we're doing this, giving this information out during the season, the same thing could be said for defensive back and cornerback. Like, who's in the position to be targeted the most or not, and you make your decisions off of that. So there are some good cornerbacks that we could talk about, and like I said, some good safeties that have good potential to start sooner rather than later.
And I have a question. I looked at the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, that's where my expertise is. And I saw some reaches, some people who fell, who might be a steal in the draft. A reach for me, at least, going into it was TDP taken by the 49ers being a big reach. Tyquan Thornton, who was a sleeper of mine, but I didn't expect him to get the capital that he did. Were certainly looked like NFL draft reaches, and the capital does matter. On the defensive side of the ball, do we have any reaches, steals, or good or bad landing spots for certain players? Any individuals that stand out in this rookie class to talk about from that perspective?
So, I think a reach, unfortunately, has to go at the number 1 overall pick position in Trayvon Walker. He grades as a player who, in a few seasons, will really have the potential and the opportunity to really turn it up and to get that production on the defensive level as a starter in the NFL, as well as for your IDP fantasy rosters. When I hear the words potential, I don't want that to be synonymous with the number 1 overall pick. I want that pick to come in, start day 1, and be ready to turn it up and get you tons of production. I'm not sure you're going to get that out of Walker based off of the evaluations that we've been reading of about him since the draft and prior to the draft. In terms of a player who just fell that everyone should be super excited for is Nakobi Dean out of Georgia. Had some shoulder issues. He elected not to get surgery after the season was done. And people are saying that's the primary reason why he fell all the way down to Philadelphia. I believe it was the 3rd round. People were saying that he should be, a first-round pick. And Philadelphia, who, by the way, has done a tremendous job addressing the defensive side of the ball this year. I think you're going to be surprised with how well the Eagles play in 2022. He's great at playing inside linebacker. He's great at rushing the passer. He's great in coverage. I mean, this guy is a Swiss Army knife, and that's exactly what you want out of any positional player, to be honest with you. For IDP, yeah, give me a player who can do all sorts of things to get me more points on Sunday, and you'll be happy.
Right on. And before we get to some of these individuals that are going to be able to step in with promise, like you mentioned earlier, Tyler, you had a question about a specific player?
Yeah, kind of falls into the notable reaches, steals, good or bad landing spots question, because leading up to the draft, I heard a lot of, we'll call them draft heads, as if they were asked the question, hey, who is a guy you could see sneaking into the first round that no one is talking about? It ended up being Cole Strange, but that's not here nor there. So a lot of them would say Leo Chanel, and that kind of got me looking into it. And that dude's a freak. He's jumping over 40 inches in the broad. He's running a 4.5 40, 6'3", 250. He's a monster. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you probably shouldn't be leading your team in tackles and sacks and forced fumbles and tackles for loss, right? That those two usually don't match up.
Well, I would hope that somebody is. I would hope if I'm the head coach that I have somebody as dominant on my team that's able to do that. So I'm totally okay with that. Is it rare? Absolutely. And that is true. It really comes down to Tyler. Let's look at what happened last year in the NFL. Offenses started to get more pass heavy. Quarterbacks started taking the next leap. Josh Allen took the next step in his game. Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. Justin Herbert, who finished as the number 2 quarterback overall in fantasy, he stepped up his game. Just the passing game in general has been getting more prevalent from year to year. You look at what's happened in the AFC West, for example, speaking of Leo Chenal and going to the Kansas City Chiefs. You got Russell Wilson, you got Devontae Adams, you got all these influx of players on the offensive side of the ball going to the Chiefs competition. It makes these quarterbacks in the AFC West a little bit more dangerous. And so from that perspective, need may not have been the primary thing they needed to address in terms of linebacker, strong linebacker, which Chenal is currently slated to be behind Jermaine Carter, according to ourlads.com. So it's good for them. It's great value. It's great value for the Chiefs, but it's not one that necessarily needed to get right away.
Gotcha. So do you think he'll find his way into some snaps?
So the thing here, and Nate Markham of Shoot the Gap, the host of Shoot the Gap, and he's been doing our IDP content for years here at Fantasy and Frames. Top 4 Nate, as we like to call him, as he finished in the top 4 of IDP rankings over at Fantasy Pros last year. He'll tell you, in a perfect universe, it's only a matter of time before these high impact rookies get in there, or even free agents get in there and do their thing. But there's something called the Steve Spagnolo effect, where just when you think you know what he's going to do, he turns everything upside down. It's like the upside down in Stranger Things 4. Everything is in the upside down when it comes to him and on defense. So you don't really know where I'm trying to go with this is if he's going to put these players that we think fit a certain role, in fact, the role that he thinks they should be in. And so it's because of that, I'm concerned early on with Chenal getting any immediate snaps off the gate, but just like anybody like Nick Bolton last year for the Chiefs, as he produced well in limited fashion, he started to take on more and more responsibilities, and so there is a possibility that Chenal does get some playing time this year, but I wouldn't count on a huge number of snaps for him.
Okay. So we've alluded a few times here to rookies that are in a good position to step in and start. So what are a few that come to mind for you as being well positioned to get a lot of playing time and therefore be fantasy producers?
So I mentioned his name earlier in the rookie mock we did last week. Devin Lloyd going to be lining up inside right there with Oluokun, an inside linebacker. This guy had 4 interceptions last year. He had 8 sacks. And like I said, folks, remember, defensive end and outside linebackers, they're the ones who primarily get the sacks, get the quarterback hits. This is an inside linebacker who's getting this production out there. Just a Swiss Army knife again. You want those Swiss Army knives to really help your IDP roster. He's definitely somebody. I talked about Nakobi Dean, a player who I am thrilled about this year is Quay Walker, Green Bay Packer, also a Georgia Bulldog last year. According to PFF, he was the second best rated tackling linebacker in all of college football, with a tackle rate of 14.4%, which is amazing, which is coincidentally the tackle rate that his now teammate Devondre Campbell had last year. And for those who had Devondre Campbell on their IDP rosters, they were very happy with his production last year. He was one of the top IDP scorers in all of IDP fantasy football. Walker ranked 6th in coverage amongst all linebackers in 2021. So his skill set really makes him a player that's kind of playing with the 1A to Devondre Campbell. And today I saw a report come out of OTAs for the Packers where basically they're saying Quay Walker is going to redefine how the Green Bay Packers play defense. I mean, if that's not a compliment to how good of a player you are, I don't know what is. Christian Harris is another one, Alabama linebacker. had 122 career defensive stops, the most by any linebacker from Alabama in school history. He went to the Houston Texans. This is a player who he is just behind an incumbent in Christian Kirksey, who is, an older veteran who he played, decently well last year in terms of IDP, not so much in tackle rate or efficiency, which tells you that, he better not stop getting tackles. He better have his tackle volume be high, because if he has a low tackle volume and he's inefficient in making those tackles and he's getting a higher missed tackle percentage than a solo tackle percentage, if you're missing more than you're hitting, that's not going to keep you on the field. And so all that's waiting for Christian Harris to take over is just Christian Kirksey's play starting to dip. This guy is one of the best rated, run stopping linebackers in all of college football last year in the SEC. And you look at, who they go up against, these inside linebackers I mentioned, they go after the running back of the opposing teams. Jonathan Taylor, I hear they run him a lot in Indianapolis. Derrick Henry, I hear they run him a lot in Tennessee. Assuming James Robinson's able to get back in the form after tearing his Achilles last year, James Robinson ran the ball, effectively well for the Jaguars. So plenty of opportunities for Christian Harris to do some damage for your IDP rosters. Jacqueline Brisker, let's go to defensive back. This guy immediately steps into a starting role with the Chicago Bears. He played at Penn State. He played nearly 60% of the snaps in the box, which means closer to the line of scrimmage, meaning he basically was playing. Folks, if you could read our private chat right now, you'd be laughing hysterically with all the phrasing that's going on. Going back to Jacqueline Brisker, played 60% of snaps in the box, which means he was acting as that inside linebacker who was attacking the running game, more tackles, higher tackle floor. He's in a great position. He literally is the starter right now. That's something to keep in mind in your drafts going forward, not only in Dynasty, but in redraft. If you wanted to wait on defensive back for most of your draft and you need to fill in that spot late in your draft, I guarantee you Jacqueline Brisker is a name that most players who aren't as in tune as we are will probably not know about. And he's definitely somebody that can slide in and do a great job at defensive back for you. Jalen Petrie, Houston Texans. This is a product of Justin Reid no longer being there for the Texans. He's now with the Kansas City Chiefs, and good riddance for if you're the Houston Texans fans, because Justin Reid had one of the worst missed tackle percentages, aka one of the highest missed tackle percentages in all of football for defensive backs, for all the safeties. Which again, if your player is missing more than he is hitting at tackling, that's not a good sign. Petrie benefits on being on a bad team. Texans are going to be on the field for a long time, every game, and the more opportunity he has to play a strong safety, to get his tackle volume number high, it won't really matter if he's too efficient or not, because again, the volume will be there because he will be on the field a very long time. Guys, I could go on all day. Daxton Hill, Jesse Bates. If you remember in the AFC Championship, it was Von Bell and Jesse Bates, specifically Jesse Bates, who tipped the ball that allowed Von Bell to make the interception against Patrick Mahomes in overtime, which ultimately led to the game-winning field goal kick for the Cincinnati Bengals. Jesse Bates is having a little bit of a contract issue right now. Great free safety, plays in coverage well. That's what free safety does. They play basically as another cornerback, so to speak. Playing over, the middle of the field in coverage. But Daxton Hill, out of Michigan, he's basically Jesse Bates 2.0 and Von Bell 2.0 in the sense that he can play both in coverage and closer to the line of scrimmage. He's been utilized in both ways over the course of his collegiate career. And he's somebody who, if for some reason Jesse Bates decides not to re-sign, I don't know whether it's his franchise tender or just a new contract, whatever's keeping him off the field now, if he chooses to play hardball and Daxton Hill is given the opportunity to start, Jesse Bates may need to be looking somewhere else to play in 2023 going forward, because Daxton Hill is just that good. But going back to Tyler, your question though about Leo Chenal and why he fell so much, it's because a player like Brian Cook is on the field. Specifically, He's going to slide into the strong safety role here for Kansas City. Again, strong safeties play closer to the line of scrimmage. They play against the run, aka high tackle numbers. And it's, he's taking over. I should say he is the backup to Justin Reid, who I just was mentioning played for Houston, who had a horrible missed tackle percentage. Well, I think they brought in Justin Reid to be the Tyrann Mathieu replacement, even though you can't really replace Tyrann Mathieu because he's one of the great defensive backs in all of the NFL and in all of not so much IDP, but for just in the NFL in general in terms of great play. But Justin Reid, the question here is how long can he hold on to the job? It's not so much like a Christian Kirksey situation with the Texans in that he's older and he's, his play is declining. His play has declined. There's no trend. It's declined. And so whether or not he can hold off Brian Cook or not is a different story. This guy's a high volume tackler, and Brian Cook, all he needs is that opportunity to get in there and do his thing.
Okay. Thank you for that rundown. That's valuable, especially for folks who may be just getting into the dynasty side of IDP, the IDP side of dynasty. In our dynasty world, it's just maybe winding down rookie draft season. My last few are, petering out, and when that happens, as that is our only really draft of the year, once the league is running, we look around and we need something to scratch that draft itch. And where do we go? Tyler, where would you go?
I personally would go to Underdog Fantasy. I would download the app and I would jump in one of their best ball leagues, one of the many that they have. While you're getting set up on that app, you can use the code FRAMES, FRAMES, because we partnered with Underdog because we're two brands with one common goal, and it's to make fantasy fun for everyone. So, we're sitting here talking about NFL. You can absolutely go and do an NFL best ball draft. You can do any major sport on their platform. They do a great job with their drafts. You can set up your own best ball league. You can invite some friends. You can add a dollar amount to it, or you can join one of their hundreds of pre-made leagues with entry fees ranging from $3 to $100. You're sitting on the couch on a weeknight, or, for us older folk on a weekend night, you can hop on there, pay $3, knock out a 12-team draft in 45 minutes to an hour. Now is the best time of the year to do it. I love doing it right now in May and June because I feel like we're getting a very clear jump on, we'll call them the redraft crowd, before they start coming in August and actually knowing what's going on. So we get that opportunity to capitalize on all of us having a crystal ball. You can also play pick and prop games on Underdog, really? NFL, MLB, NBA, all of that. Most importantly, you can have fun with it. It's a lot of fun. It's the best ball platform on the planet, in my opinion. I love it. I will have plenty of leagues by the time the season kicks off in September.
Right on. What's interesting about Underdog, I don't know if you all remember, I want to say this is back in 2017, 2018, the app draft, or the draft app, where it was they sold draft to FanDuel, and FanDuel never did anything with the platform, and which is a huge mistake on their part, I think. Although they're not exactly hurting, Anyhow, so the makers of Draft are the same ones who made Underdog. Nice. And so they've been making improvement off Draft, and Draft was highly popular, one of the most awesome best ball apps you could have, and so it's no wonder that Underdog is just taken off like it has.
Right on. And I mentioned Rookie Draft as my, seamless segue into the Underdog Draft because that's the next topic we're going to talk about with Jorge. So the crew, Shoot the Gap, as you mentioned, did a Dynasty rookie mock on the IDP side. And for those of you who are listening, we have that pulled up visually. So we're going to be talking through this a little bit. And so, if you want to get really a lot of good analysis and good detail about it, I would suggest going to Shoot the Gap on your podcatcher and going to listen to this, well, all episodes, but this rookie mock episode, we're going to give sort of an overview here and take a look at some notable picks. So what would you say sort of overall, if you had to talk about the rookie mock, anything that is a trend or something that stood out, or was it that you had these assigned roles like a rebuilder, et cetera, that sort of dictated things?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
To answer your question honestly, obviously, we gave these pre-assigned efficiencies to everyone's roster. That way you can, if you're somebody who's watching this, for example, or listening to the podcast or watching the live stream video of it on YouTube, you may be in a similar situation in your leagues where you don't know how to approach taking a player based off of your current needs. And so we try to address as many needs during this rookie mock draft as we had. And so some of our analysts, who we had a couple of the guys over from Gridiron Ratings join us, Jeff and Ronnie, they're great guys. And if I got to talk to you guys about getting them on Dynasty 365. Great Dynasty content they do over there, over at Gridiron Ratings. That notwithstanding, we all tried our best to do a little combination of sticking within the parameters of what we were deficient at. At the same time, it's kind of one of those things where you run into the same situation on offense where it's like, look, best player available is best player available. I can't just pass this up regardless of how well I'm stacked in a certain position. Mm-hmm. So, Jeff DiMatteo over at Gridiron Ratings, his scenario was that his team was perfect. He had no holes to fill. He just was drafting for the sake of drafting because
a scenario that I'm very unfamiliar with.
Yeah, as are most of us, right? So one of his first pick was Nakobi Dean, who I was talking about earlier, who's in the Philadelphia Eagles now. The issue was his shoulder. Is his shoulder going to be right this year? Is he going to be able to return to form like he was at Georgia? Or is this a situation that's worth monitoring, that he could potentially be somebody who never sees the field? Obviously, the Eagles thought that there was more upside than downside, which is why they took him where they did. And so for somebody like Jeff, who has a decent roster, he can take that gamble on a player like Nakobi Dean. He can take that gamble on a player that may sit out a year because he's already good at the linebacker position. And maybe in a couple of years or a year later, Nakobi Dean can slide in and do his thing. We talk about best player available, Hollywood Titan, who's a member of the Shoot the Gap crew. He had issues with linebacker and defensive lineman, but his very first pick was the best player available in his mind, which was Kyle Hamilton, the safety at Baltimore. It's yet to be determined whether he's going to be playing strong safety or free safety. I think I saw something about him playing strong safety. This guy, again, and I said this term throughout the entire pod, the Swiss Army knife of a player. This guy can do it from all over the field. It's just a matter of Baltimore putting him in the right position to do so. But he, according to Hollywood, he was the best player available, had to do it. Next, you look at a guy like Mike Woolert, who you can find his work over at 4for4.com or DLF, where he does all these IDP breakdowns. He's somebody who helped get me into IDP, to be honest with you. So we're very fortunate to have him on Shoot the Gap. He was needing defensive end help, and we look at players like George Karlaftis for Kansas City, who were available at the time. We had Trayvon Walker, who was the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft, who I think I've beaten the dead horse enough that we're all just not a fan of where he was taken. But he went for Arnold Ebiketti out of Atlanta for the Falcons, who this guy should immediately slide into a starting role and be the most dominant pass rusher the Falcons have on their defensive line. So now it's about opportunity and addressing team need. And for me, it was the same scenario where Devin Lloyd was somebody who I wanted to build my roster around because my team was in shambles. The next round, I addressed linebacker. Next round, I wanted to go after the best defensive lineman. And I went for Boye Mafe, who should be the starting defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks. And, barring the Seahawks making some kind of Baker Mayfield trade or something in the quarterback position, when Geno Smith is projected to be the starter over Drew Lock. That's not a good sign. It's not a good sign for your offense. And so Mafe should be on the field a lot for the Seahawks there. And then I mentioned him earlier, Justin Petrie. This guy for Houston Texans. They're going to be on the field a lot. High tackle volume at strong safety. Really good player there. So I thought I addressed the three major areas: defensive back, defensive lineman, and linebacker pretty solidly. So I felt pretty good about that. Our draft was only 5 rounds long.
Mhm.
So, and it was and I think I was talking to you about this earlier, Brian. I don't know how all rookie drafts are.
Mhm.
Ours tend to be non-snake, so
Yeah.
linear. And Tyler, I don't know if you've encountered that the same.
Yeah, I don't know of many rookie drafts, aside from maybe a secondary startup rookie draft, why it would be snake.
Right, exactly. I will say, though, there is one player here who was taken by Hollywood that all of us were kind of shocked that he was drafted where he was drafted by. I'm talking about Chad Muma, linebacker for the Jacksonville Jaguars. So it was very interesting on draft night because you draft Devin Lloyd, who should be Foya Oluokun's partner at inside linebacker. You drafted Trayvon Walker to be your new starting edge rusher. Okay, so you addressed both the inside and outside positions on your defense. And then they went ahead and drafted Chad Muma, who's an inside linebacker, who's one of the best tackling linebackers in all of college football last year. And he's now, third string? But now the rationale here, and this is why I made it such a good pick, is because while Foya Oluokun had a great year last year in Atlanta, had a huge total tackle number, huge solo tackle number, he was a very inefficient tackler. And that only keeps you on the field for so long. Because eventually, once you start hitting or missing more than you're hitting, like I said earlier, that's not going to do well for you. So I believe the Jaguars have an out next year where that would save them $30 million. So if Muma can show the type of output that he showed in college and kind of give them a reason to save $30 million, they're going to get rid of Oluokun and insert Muma into that starting role. Which is great for his IDP relevance. And so I thought that was a really good pick, as was Hollywood's pick of Christian Harris. Again, he's a product of being behind just an older player, and all they need to see is a different production, a continued different production from Christian Kirksey. Let's see here. Ronnie from Gridiron Ratings, second round, got Quan Brisker. Talked about him earlier. Immediately starts in that starting safety role for the Chicago Bears. The Bears defense looks like they're going to be on the field. Well, I shouldn't say that because it's a new regime. It's a new coach, new everything going on there with the Bears. Maybe the Bears will surprise some players or surprise some people. I don't believe that, but we'll see if it does. So that being said, my thought here is that the Bears defense is going to be on the field a lot, which is great for Brisker. And great for his tackle upside. So there are a bunch of players around here that just really fell in key positions. Kaiir Elam, defensive back, Buffalo Bills, cornerback specifically. One of the benefits of drafting a cornerback here, thank you very much, Gator J. One of the benefits of drafting this cornerback in your IDP leagues, or maybe just getting him off the waiver wire as like a weekly IDP flex play, is that he's playing opposite of Tre'Davious White. And Tre'Davious White, for those who don't know, is one of the best defensive backs or cornerbacks in all of the NFL. So if I'm an opposing quarterback, I'm not exactly throwing his way. If you know what I mean, I don't want to get my passes intercepted or knocked down more often than not. Who I will go after, however, is an inexperienced cornerback who's not as great in tackling, who is okay in coverage. That's Kaiir Elam. They're people for the Bills thought, I actually don't know what the Bills were thinking taking him with one of their early picks. He's not exactly excelling in any one department, but needless to say, he is going to get picked on a lot by opposing quarterbacks, which is great because when that happens, plays like passes defense, where a cornerback breaks up a pass or puts his hand on the ball, those odds increase. the chances for big plays like interceptions, those odds increase. Making tackles once a wide receiver makes a catch, those odds increase. So the similar to targets we're talking about on offense or receptions, those opportunities increase. And so the more those opportunities increase, the greater your chances for point production. Obviously, that's my Booger Farland analysis there for anybody who knows I make from time to time, if not all the time. There are a lot of players all over this board here. And again, like Brian said, if you wanted to go listen to the entire draft or look at the video, it was only 5 rounds long. Head over to Shoot the Gap Pod on Twitter. You'll find that there. Wherever you listen to podcasts, subscribe to the Shoot the Gap podcast, and we'll go over all that. And of course, we're on every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. So whatever questions you have, just shoot them our way.
All right. So, Jorge, if you're listening to audio, Jorge referenced Gator J, and that's a reference to the visual element of our comments at the bottom. For those watching, of course, are seeing them. Gator J is a new friend of the show and was a participant in our rookie mock on the YouTube side, and is very enthusiastic about Dynasty. And he has a question about. Oh, first of all, hi Gator J, love you. And I was going to ask if you had IDP questions, and it looks like he does have one. Jorge, what do you think about this one?
So currently, and again, this is, the last day in May talk here, Gator J. Currently, he's slotted to be the starting cornerback, one of the starting cornerbacks for the Buffalo Bills. So he will be starting opposite of Tre'Davious White. They already have nickel cornerback who actually played pretty well. I think it was Taron Johnson is his name. He played pretty well last year. So they're not going to get rid of Taron Johnson for Elam. So Elam should be sliding as the second cornerback for the Bills.
Okay. So in IDP, even though this is Dynasty, and even though we are at the end of rookie draft season, there are other things that we need to talk about the rest of the offseason for vets too. But before we do, Tyler, do you have anything while we have the draft board up to talk about?
I do. Actually, the one thing that jumped out to me was the discussion with Chad Muma and Devin Lloyd and was it Foye Aluakon? Is that correct, Jorge? Is that how it's pronounced?
Luakun, yes, but close enough.
All right. I'll take it.
Okay.
So when you're playing in the AFC South and you're playing the two best teams in your division are run heavy, you're looking at Titans with Derrick Henry, you're looking at the Colts with Jonathan Taylor. Why can't Chad Muma and Devin Lloyd and Aluakun, whatever, get a lot of snaps at the same time? I know a lot of teams don't traditionally play 3 linebackers, but it seems like Chad Muma and Devin Lloyd are athletic enough to cover a slot receiver who might not be all that fast or drop down to the line and rush the passer. I guess what's the argument about them getting on the field all together?
So here's something that Jacksonville did really well at. They drafted a lot of versatile players. So I talked about Devin Lloyd earlier and his run stopping ability, his prowess, also his ability to rush the passer. So let's, when we think about this, they got 2 linebackers, meaning the Jaguars, in the first round, and Trayvon Walker, edge rusher. They got Devin Lloyd, inside linebacker, but could play edge rusher, which then could bring in Muma to inside linebacker to go with Aluakun. You're right. Not often in the NFL these days do you see 3 linebackers. We call this base personnel. So you have a 4-3 defense where you have your 4 defensive linemen, and then you have your 3 linebackers, or you have a 3-4 with 3 defensive linemen and 4 linebackers. But more often than not, what you see, because it is a pass-heavy league, you see what's called nickel defenses, where you have 2 linebackers, and then you have your defensive backs. But this could be a situation, and you're not wrong. This is entirely possible, Tyler, that the Jaguars go back to more of a base personnel situation and utilize, Muma and Lloyd and Aluakun all at the same time. That's the part that remains to be seen. That's what people need to listen to during the quote-unquote dead zone periods as we get closer to redraft season, because that's going to give you a lot more insight into the player's value going forward.
So our boss, Jorge, being the brilliant podcaster that he is, gives us a great segue into the next part of the show that we want to talk about, sort of beyond rookies. So we can move the draft board off for now. So we are entering the quote unquote dead zone, right? Rookie fever, draft season, and then we're doing the fallout and re-ranking and summarizing. And I believe the first real training camp starts on the 11th of July. I think that's the Ravens, and then most start, I guess, about a week or 10 days after. So there's this period that we sort of jokingly call the dead zone, where here at Dynasty 365 there is no dead zone. It's 365. But at the same time, it is in recognition of the fact that it's quote unquote slow as far as the NFL news and is. So, if from an IDP perspective, what should IDP players be looking at? Dynasty IDP players, especially during the dead zone and moving into training camps.
So, whether it's specifically for Dynasty IDP players or just any player, I really want to say in general, ignore head coach speak, listen to positional coach speak. And I think that's something that you should really pay attention to, because the positional coaches are the ones who are going to advise the head coach, hey, you should be playing this guy, not that guy. They're the ones who are bringing this information to their head coach so that the head coach can make a big decision as far as who's starting where. This is the time of year where you're going to see a lot of assistant coaches and coordinators ask a lot of questions. Knock on wood, we can get a coordinator for all of our podcasts here at Fantasy and Frames. That would be fantastic to talk their ear off about who we should be starting in our fantasy leagues going forward. That notwithstanding, a lot of coach reporting, a lot of beat team writers, just giving their information as far as what they're seeing, what they're hearing. Obviously, just like everybody else, a lot of it is hearsay. Some could be misdirect, some cannot be, some might not be. You really have to think about who has a track record for giving you misleading information, who doesn't. But that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, trying to figure out how we go about doing that. As far as other things, during this dead zone, just as a fantasy football content creator and as a group here at Fantasy and Frames, and really with all the different groups out there, this is a great time for collaboration. This is a great time to meet the other content creators, to really, put your brains together and really get some cool content out there and just discuss things from perspectives that maybe, we never thought of. So just because there's not a lot of going on the football field doesn't mean there's not a lot to talk about or different perspectives to take away from. And, at the end of the day, we're trying to make everybody a great fantasy football player, to enjoy playing fantasy football. And that's what you're going to get, especially here on Dynasty 365.
Right on. Tyler, specifically, you wanted to point to what to look for with cornerbacks?
Yeah. I feel like we hit it pretty hard already, but I guess just to ask the question, are cornerbacks near a non-entity if they aren't getting interceptions or pass breakups? I won't use the acronym there.
If they're not getting those plays?
Yes.
No, they are not.
Okay.
Yeah, you can if a cornerback is, I'll give you a good example. The really good players in IDP on the defensive side of the ball don't necessarily make them good IDP players. Like we were just talking about Elam in Buffalo, Tre'Davious White. He's who he's going to be lining up, next to. Nobody's throwing at Tre'Davious White. So if you have a cornerback who's not being targeted in the passing game, well, he's not going to do anything for you from a fantasy point production, because he's not going to have the opportunity to give you those points for fantasy point production. So you really want the people who are being targeted more often than not, or being asked to shadow other players who move all over the field. And that's where, again, and I keep saying this over and over again today, the Swiss Army knives of defensive play, those are the players that you want to keep an eye on, that you want to get on your rosters, especially for your dynasty, and keep them on your bench if they're younger players, and really just watch them develop.
And here at Fantasy and Frames, we're going to be rolling out our dynasty. Oh, do we have a question from Gator J?
Yes. He says, in an IDP league, how do you rank positions of priority? How do I answer that question? How do I rank positions in terms of priority? Well, it depends. Like, again, it comes down to your fantasy point scoring settings as far as like what plays are rewarded the most points and kind of adjusting your rankings from that point forward. So, for example, here at fantasyandframes.com, we have our IDP Dynasty rankings up here that were just done over the weekend. Nate should be adding his pretty soon. And they're still, we're still compiling some of these players, but for the most part, they're done. And we rank these players based off of how they would fit into our IDP scoring settings. We have them listed by IDP. We have them listed by defensive back, defensive lineman, linebacker. So it comes down to the priority being who has the best pathway to playing time, to playing snaps, and then adjusting from that point forward.
Okay. And that sort of volume and opportunity thing is something that translates over to the offensive side of the ball. So we're going to be rolling out or have started rolling out our Dynasty Targets article series on the website, fantasyandframes.com. Some guy has a fun Matrix-themed intro to the Derek Carr article. Maybe you should go read it. That made me think of the question about IDP targets. Can you identify, and it doesn't have to be rookies, IDP dynasty targets that people should look for to acquire this offseason?
Wow, that's a great question. Let me pull up my rankings here while I'm trying to give you a good I think a player that a lot of people are not taking I don't know if serious is the right word, but he's just flying under the radar. Bobby Okariki, linebacker for the Indianapolis Colts. He had a great solo tackle hit percentage last year, great total tackle numbers, really did a good job, but he gets overshadowed by Darius Leonard. So you don't really hear too much about him. Let's see here. Nick Bolton for the Kansas City Chiefs is probably going to be more difficult to acquire him. He was one of those players who was a rookie last year who came on as the season progressed. His total tackle rate was high. His solo tackle rate was high. Most importantly, his missed tackle rate was very low. So that's exactly what you want. Somebody who's really hitting on all cylinders. Going back to Okariki, he's actually my LB13. I feel that strongly about him. Cole Holcomb, he had a great year last year in the total tackle department. He's the inside linebacker for Washington. He's definitely somebody to keep an eye on in terms of getting him on your rosters. A lot of people were thinking like, oh, well, Washington's going to address the linebacking position because they're not sold on Holcomb. No, they're sold on him in the fact that they didn't address the linebacking position. And currently in team practices, he's holding it down with Jamin Davis as the inside middle linebacker. A lot of people are going to be on the Zaven Collins bandwagon for Arizona. Mm-hmm. I need to see it before I can say go ahead and go forward. We talked about Nakobi Dean. We talked about Christian Harris. Two linebackers that I think need to be monitored like yesterday are both for the San Francisco 49ers, Dre Greenlaw and Azeez Al-Shaair. Greenlaw was actually one of my sleeper linebackers heading into last season. Then week 1, he got a groin injury. He basically was dealing with that throughout the rest of the season. And Azeez Al-Shaair kind of stepped into his role and just took off, was dominating IDP as an LB2. He's somebody who should be paying attention to with both their contract situations. I think wherever either of these linebackers goes, if they have a starting path to snaps, that's somebody that you want to hold on to. Man, there's a lot out there.
Yeah. That's why it's hard to choose who to write about for the article series. It's like, well, I have so many targets, but yeah, it's that's gonna be fun. But Tyler has a very shameless question that is no joke.
Nice, very well done, Brian.
Hey.
So as people that listen might know, I am a Cleveland Browns fan, and in watching the games last year, I was watching Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, JOK, joke. Good work, Brian. Call him Joker. he had a slow start to the season, being a rookie, didn't have a lot of snaps. He started seeing a whole lot of snaps, being really productive. Then he got hurt, and it was kind of just a slow go the rest of the season. But when he was on the field and he was healthy, that dude was everywhere. He was flying around. I loved watching him play. Is his value is it depressed, or is people very excited about him in IDP right now? And his tackle ceiling, as well as his ability to possibly rush the passer, or pass the rush, or whatever you want to call it.
So currently Cleveland operates in that 5-2 setting defensive scheme where they have two linebackers. And right now the starting two linebackers are Anthony Walker, who they brought back at middle, and Joke is right there at weak side linebacker. And what's really cool about the weak side linebacker position is they are the guys who are probably the most athletic of all the linebackers on the field. So you want to talk about Joker's ability when he was at Notre Dame and all the hype that came out of him being there and coming into the NFL is his great sideline to sideline speed. This guy, like you just said, can fly all over the place. He can cover tight ends in coverage. He can attack the running game, attack the running back. He's again Swiss Army knife of a player who just didn't get enough opportunity, whether it was due to injury or incumbent playing time. But he's slated to be the guy right now, and so yeah, he has in IDP circles. I don't think his value has changed. It's always been pretty decently high, but the fact that he had a down year his rookie year, some fantasy manager might be looking into moving him, and if you can get him for let's say a second, I think you're doing pretty well. Straight trade for trade. I would expect big things from Joke this year.
All right, so that just about wraps up our discussion of Dynasty IDP tonight. As always, for all your IDP needs, Shoot the Gap is the place to go. It's our IDP podcast Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern, and at Shoot the Gap Pod on Twitter. So for all your everything needs, fantasyandframes.com, Dynasty Rankings, soon Redraft Rankings, IDP Rankings, IDP Dynasty Rankings. It's all there. We're going to have our Dynasty Target series rolling out. We're going to be doing all sorts of articles and fun stuff on the site moving forward. And very soon also the announcement of our Best Ball charity tournament, which Gator J is going to try to get into because he's awesome and wants to play IDP. So, Jorge, anything else you'd like to plug?
Sure. So the Daily Fix crew, who you guys have had them on for numerous episodes here on Dynasty 365, Keith Fleming and Joe Matz, they're going to start up. They're going to start their Daily Fix podcast, and they're going to start a series where they're talking about is best ball, strategies behind best ball, to going against to talking about the different positions in best ball and which players to target going forward, to having best ball mock drafts go on, as well as start a Daily Fix Best Ball League this year for their podcast. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, like you talked about earlier, something to fill the time in the dead zone. Hey, sign up for as many best ball drafts using the promo code FRAMES as you want. You will not be disappointed.
All right. So Tyler, where can folks find you on Twitter, and anything else you got going on?
They can find me at FF Tyler Heil. That's HEIL. I signed up for a few Dynasty targets this week. I'm hoping to knock those things out in the next couple of weeks. I'm going to hit J.K. Dobbins. I'm going to, lean into the Browns fandom and write why you should be targeting David Njoku in your Dynasty League. And I'm just going to go for it and try to tell you why you should go get Kadarius Toney and be the only person trying to convince you of that on planet Earth.
All right. So you can find me on Twitter at FFJunkie_. Follow Fantasy and Frames on Twitter for all your needs, as well as links to all our podcasts. If you're listening in audio, subscribe, rate, review. That's a wrap. Thanks for being with us.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.